The Cursed School, Secrets of Blackwood Academy. Chapter 1, The Arrival. Emily Carter never believed in ghosts. But from the moment she stepped through the iron gates of Blackwood Academy, something inside her whispered, "You shouldn't be here." The school stood tall and ominous, its stone walls covered in creeping ivy, its windows dark and lifeless. A thick mist clung to the ground, and the towering trees surrounding the academy made it feel cut off from the rest of the world. Emily pulled her suitcase behind her, stepping onto the cold stone path. The air felt heavier here, as if the school itself was breathing. The headmistress, Miss Holloway, greeted her at the entrance. A tall woman with pale skin and piercing gray eyes, she barely smiled as she spoke. "Welcome to Blackwood Academy, Miss Carter. I trust you'll follow the rules, and stay out of trouble." Emily nodded, feeling uneasy. She hadn't even done anything yet. As she walked toward her dormitory, she noticed something strange. The portraits lining the hallways seemed to be watching her. And then she heard it. A whisper. "Turn back, before it's too late." She spun around. The hallway was empty. Chapter 2, The Forbidden Wing. During her first week, Emily made a few friends, Daniel, Sophie, and Jake. They were all curious about the school's dark history, and soon, Emily learned about the Forbidden Wing. "It used to be a dormitory," Sophie whispered one evening in the library. "But something happened there years ago. Something terrible." "What do you mean?" Emily asked. Daniel leaned in. "They say one night, every student in that wing vanished. No bodies, no evidence. Just gone." Emily scoffed. "Come on. That sounds like an urban legend." Jake shook his head. "Then why do teachers act so weird whenever we ask about it? And why do students hear whispers coming from behind the locked doors?" Emily felt a chill. She wasn't sure if it was the cold air, or the fear settling into her bones. Chapter 3, The Shadow in the Mirror. One night, unable to sleep, Emily decided to go to the bathroom. The hallway was silent, too silent, and as she walked, the floorboards creaked beneath her feet. She reached the bathroom, flicked on the dim light, and walked to the mirror. As she washed her hands, she saw something behind her. A shadowy figure stood in the corner. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She turned around, nothing was there. Her heart pounding, she looked back at the mirror. The shadow was closer. And this time, it had red, glowing eyes. Emily stumbled backward, her breath ragged. Then, the light flickered violently, and the whispering began again. "Leave, before it's too late." The door slammed shut behind her. Emily screamed. Chapter 4, The Key to the Past. The next day, Emily told her friends what she had seen. Sophie's face turned pale. "We need to find out what happened here," she said. Jake nodded. "There's an old archive room in the basement. Maybe we can find some answers there." That night, they sneaked into the basement. The air was damp, and the smell of mold filled the room. They searched through the dusty records and old newspapers until Emily found something. A student registry from 1956. She flipped through the pages and gasped. Every student who had lived in the Forbidden Wing had been crossed out. This isn't normal," Daniel muttered. Then, Sophie pointed to a name at the bottom of the list. Eleanor Blackwood. Emily's stomach twisted. Who is she? They searched more and found an old newspaper article. The headline sent shivers down Emily's spine. "Tragedy at Blackwood Academy, student dies in mysterious fire." The article described a girl, Eleanor Blackwood, who died in a fire that broke out in the Forbidden Wing. Some believed it was an accident. Others weren't so sure. Then, Emily noticed the photo of Eleanor. Her eyes glowed red. Just like the shadow in the mirror. Chapter 5, The Door That Shouldn't Open. Determined to uncover the truth, the friends made a reckless decision. They were going to sneak into the Forbidden Wing. At midnight, they approached the rusted metal door at the end of the hallway. It had been locked for years, but as Emily reached for it, The door creaked open. The hallway beyond was dark, the air thick with dust and the smell of something burned. They stepped inside, their flashlights barely illuminating the decaying walls and broken furniture. The whispers started immediately. "Help me!" Emily's stomach churned. Then, Sophie screamed. A figure crawled out of the shadows, a girl, her body covered in burn marks, her red eyes glowing in the darkness. "Why did you come?" the ghostly figure whispered. Daniel grabbed Emily's arm. "We need to go. Now." But Eleanor lifted her hand, and suddenly, the door slammed shut. Chapter 6: The Curse of Eleanor Blackwood. Emily's breath came in short gasps. "Eleanor, we know what happened to you," she shouted. The ghost hesitated. "The fire, they blamed me," Eleanor's voice cracked. "But it wasn't my fault. They locked me inside. They let me burn." Emily's heart pounded. "Who did?" "The teachers. The headmistress." The whispers grew louder and angrier. "They must pay." The air turned icy cold, and objects began flying across the room. "Run!" Jake yelled. They sprinted toward the door, pushing against it. It wouldn't budge. Eleanor screamed, a horrible, inhuman sound. Emily grabbed the student registry from her bag and held it up. "Eleanor, you're not forgotten. We know the truth." The ghost froze. The rage in her red eyes turned to sadness. The wind stopped. The objects fell to the ground. The door burst open, and they ran. As they reached the hallway, Emily turned back one last time. Eleanor stood there, her red eyes fading. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, she vanished. Chapter 7: The Secret Buried in the Ashes. The next morning, the headmistress called Emily to her office. "You were in the Forbidden Wing last night, weren't you?" Miss Holloway's voice was cold. Emily didn't deny it. "Eleanor told us the truth," she said. "About the fire. About what you did." Miss Holloway's eyes darkened. Some secrets should remain buried. Emily stood her ground. Not anymore. That evening, the truth about Blackwood Academy was exposed. Newspapers reported the long-forgotten tragedy, and Miss Holloway resigned in disgrace. As for Eleanor, she was never seen again. But sometimes, on cold October nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear a whisper in the hallways of Blackwood Academy. Thank you. The Haunting of Ravenswood Academy. Chapter 1: The New Student. Sarah Dawson had never heard of Ravenswood Academy until the day she was enrolled. Her parents, eager to give her a top-tier education, had transferred her to the old boarding school, located deep within a dense, misty forest. The moment she arrived, she felt it. Something was wrong. The building loomed above her, its ancient stone walls covered in ivy, the windows dark as if no life existed inside. The air smelled damp, like rotting wood and something else, something metallic. Sarah clutched her suitcase and took a deep breath. It was just an old school. Nothing more. But as she walked through the grand entrance hall, the massive chandelier above flickered, casting shadows across the dimly lit corridor. And then, she heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible. "Leave, before the bell tolls 3. She spun around. The hall was empty. Chapter 2: The Vanishing Bell. Sarah quickly made friends with Ethan, Claire, and Max, 3 students who had been at Ravenswood for a year. Over lunch, she told them about the whisper she had heard. Ethan paled. "You heard it already?" he asked. Claire nodded. "Every new student hears the warning. But most don't listen." "A warning about what?" Sarah pressed. Max leaned in. "The third bell. According to the legend, Ravenswood's clock tower tolled twice every midnight. But if it ever tolled a third time, a student would disappear." "No one remembers them," Claire whispered. It's like they never existed at all. Sarah shivered. She didn't believe in ghosts. But something about the way the students spoke, their fear was real. Chapter 3, The Portrait of the Forgotten. Determined to prove that the legend was just a myth, Sarah decided to investigate. That night, she sneaked out of her dormitory and headed to the East Wing, the oldest part of the school. The hallway was silent, except for the soft dripping of water from the cracked ceiling. As she passed by the portraits lining the walls, she noticed something unsettling. One painting, a large, dust-covered portrait of students from decades ago, had something wrong with it. Some of the faces were blurred out, as if time itself had erased them. And as she looked closer, one of the faces was disappearing. She stumbled back, her heart pounding. Was this connected to the missing students? Chapter 4, The Third Bell. The next night, she convinced Ethan, Claire, and Max to go with her to the clock tower. They climbed the spiral staircase, their flashlights barely cutting through the thick darkness. At the top, they found a massive, rusted bell, covered in dust and cobwebs. Max frowned. If the bell doesn't work, then what's making the sound? Suddenly, bong! The first bell tolled. A gust of wind rushed through the tower, though the windows were shut. Bong! The second bell rang. The temperature plummeted, and a shadow moved across the room. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Then, silence. No third toll. The students exchanged uneasy glances. Maybe it was all just a superstition. And then, Claire screamed. She was being dragged backward, her fingers scraping against the wooden floor as an invisible force pulled her into the shadows. "Help me!" she shrieked. Sarah lunged forward, grabbing Claire's wrist. But Claire's eyes widened in terror. "It's behind you!" Sarah turned. A faceless figure stood there, its hollow eyes boring into her soul. Then, bong! The third bell tolled. And Claire was gone. Chapter 5, The Forgotten Ones. The next morning, Sarah, Ethan, and Max rushed to the headmistress's office, demanding to know what happened. But when they mentioned Claire, the headmistress looked confused. "Who?" she asked. Sarah's stomach dropped. Ethan turned pale. "Claire. Our friend. She disappeared last night." The headmistress gave them a blank stare. "There is no student named Claire at Ravenswood Academy." Sarah ran back to their dormitory, searching for Claire's belongings. They were gone. Her bed empty. Her name erased from the student records. Sarah turned to Ethan and Max. "We have to stop this." Chapter 6, The Curse of Ravenswood. Determined to uncover the truth, they broke into the Forbidden Archives, a locked room beneath the school. Inside, they found dusty journals and ancient records. One entry stood out, a diary from a girl named Isabella Moore, written in 1896. The bell tolls 3, and another one is taken. The headmaster says it is a sacrifice. A debt must be paid. Sarah flipped through the pages, her hands trembling. The entries became more desperate. "I am next. I can feel it watching me. It has no face, no soul, only hunger." The last sentence sent a chill through Sarah's bones. "If you hear the third bell, run." Chapter 7, The Final Toll. That night, they returned to the clock tower. "We have to stop it," Max whispered. But as soon as they stepped inside, the first bell tolled. Bong! The shadows shifted. The air became thick, suffocating. Bong! A figure emerged from the darkness. Faceless. Hollow. It was coming for them. Sarah grabbed the rusted rope of the bell and yanked it with all her strength. If the third bell summoned the creature, maybe the fourth bell could send it back. She pulled. The creature screamed. The fourth toll echoed through the night. The shadows shrank, curling inward, dissolving into the air. And then, silence. The air felt lighter. The heaviness in the academy lifted. The curse had been broken. Chapter 8: The Missing Return. The next morning, the school felt different. Students who had once vanished were back, but they had no memory of ever being gone. Sarah ran to Claire's dormitory. And there she was, sitting on her bed, reading a book. "Sarah?" Claire asked, confused. "Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Sarah smiled. "It's a long story." That night, as she lay in bed, she listened carefully. The clock tower tolled twice. And then, nothing. The third bell was never heard again. The Cursed Classroom. Chapter 1: The Forbidden Room. When James Carter transferred to Black Hollow High, he noticed something strange about the school. It wasn't the gloomy hallways or the flickering lights; those could be blamed on old wiring. It was room 303. Unlike the rest of the classrooms, its door was chained shut, covered in dust and deep scratch marks. A faded sign hung on it. "Do not open." James nudged his new friend, Lena, during lunch. "What's up with that room?" Lena paled. "You don't want to know." James smirked. "Try me." Lena hesitated, then leaned in. "A long time ago, there was a teacher named Miss Holloway. She went crazy. Locked the door during class and no one ever came out." "No one?" James asked. Lena shook her head. "They never found the bodies. Just blood. A lot of it." James laughed. "Nice ghost story." Lena didn't laugh. "It's not a story." Chapter 2: The Dare. That night, James, Lena, and their friend Mike snuck into the school. "Let's go inside room 303, James whispered. "Are you insane?" Lena hissed. "What's the worst that could happen?" James grinned. Mike, who loved dares, nudged Lena. "Come on. 5 minutes inside." "That's it." Lena groaned but followed. They broke the rusty chain and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Desks were overturned, dark stains covered the wooden floor, and a rotten stench of decay filled the air. But the worst part? The chalkboard. Something was written on it, though no one had been in the room for years. "Welcome back, class." The door slammed shut. Chapter 3: The Lesson Begins. James grabbed the handle. It wouldn't budge. "Okay, not funny," Mike said, shining his flashlight around. The air grew heavier, as if something unseen was pressing against them. Then, creak. One of the desks moved. "What was that?" Lena whispered. The chalk on the board lifted by itself and began to write. "Detention for rule breakers." James stepped back. "Okay, that's..." Then the chairs started scraping against the floor. A low whisper filled the room. "Take your seats." The students froze. A dark figure appeared at the front of the room. It was a woman in a tattered dress, her face hollow, her eyes black pits. "Miss Holloway." Chapter 4: No Escape. James lunged for the door. It still wouldn't open. Miss Holloway drifted forward, her bony fingers tapping against the desk. "Class is in session," she whispered. Mike screamed as he was yanked back into a chair. His body froze, his eyes wide in terror. Lena gasped. He can't move." James tried to pull Mike up, but he was stuck to the seat, as if glued by an invisible force. Miss Holloway glided toward James, her mouth stretching into an unnatural grin. "A new student? Let's see if you pass, or fail." Her skeletal hand reached for him. James dodged at the last second, knocking over a desk. The whispering grew louder, a chorus of unseen voices surrounding them. "Join us, stay forever." Chapter 5: The Test. James grabbed a textbook and threw it at Miss Holloway. The book passed through her like she was made of smoke. "That won't work," Lena shouted. "We need to play along." James's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Lena pointed to the board. A question had appeared. "Solve for x. 6x 12 is equal to 0. "It's a test," she gasped. James swallowed hard. "X equals 2, he stammered. The room shook. Miss Holloway paused. Then she turned to Mike. A new question appeared. Mike was still paralyzed, unable to speak. Miss Holloway's shadowy fingers reached toward his face. "No!" Lena shouted. "Answer for him!" James yelled. Lena read the equation and blurted out the answer. Miss Holloway froze again. Then she turned to James. The final question appeared. "What happened to my class?" James's blood ran cold. He stared at the board. The whispering grew angrier. "We have to tell the truth," Lena whispered. James took a deep breath. You killed them." Silence. Miss Holloway's face contorted into rage. The shadows lunged forward. James braced himself. Then, crack. The chalk snapped in half. Miss Holloway let out an ear-piercing shriek. The room began to collapse, the walls crumbling, the ceiling splitting apart. "Run!" James shouted. Chapter 6, The Final Bell. The door flew open. They sprinted out, just as room 303 collapsed into dust. James, Lena, and Mike tumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. Mike blinked. I can move again." Lena turned to James. "We broke the curse." James looked back. Room 303 was gone. Nothing remained but a pile of rubble and the faint sound of a school bell ringing in the distance. The next morning, they told the principal everything. But when he checked the school records, there was no record of a Miss Holloway. No mention of room 303. It was as if it had never existed at all. Epilogue, the final lesson. A week later, James found something tucked inside his locker. A yellowed piece of paper, written in faded ink. Final grade, A+. At the bottom, in dark red writing, was a final message. "Good job, James. But class is never truly dismissed." James's hands trembled. Then, from somewhere in the distance, a school bell rang 3 times.